Good evening and welcome to We Got Planning News for You. Thank you all once again for joining us. Can I make the usual reminder to consider making a charity donation in lieu of a registration fee? We've got a huge range of charities we support now. We've got links and details about them on our website. They include Brian May's Save Me charity, the Wildlife Charity Shelter, the Homeless and Housing Crisis, Help Ukraine Emergency Appeal, National Energy Actions, the Samaritans, Child Poverty Action Group and the Keep Memory Memorial Foundation. So full details about them on our website. We have as our guest today, Madam President, the new President of the RTPI, Lindsey Richards. Lindsey, welcome. You're the former Head of Planning at Homes England and much, much more. Can I ask you the usual questions? Where are you? What have you chosen as our theme this morning? Justified Paul's horrendous sartorial choices. And what are you drinking?
Well, I'm good evening, and thank you for inviting me. I can't say I'm not nervous, being surrounded by so many barristers, but I'm in Northamptonshire, where it's very dark, and it's just been hailing. My theme, so it's trekking. So I've a number of items here, which is like my head torch, my Everest Base Camp map, and my trekker's guide. But interestingly, I just found my Annapurna Conservation Area permit, and it gives my date of birth as 1930, January the 1st. So I reckon that makes me 93 or 94.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I'm drinking a straight kombucha, ginger and lemon. Very healthy.
Well, Lindsey, we're really thrilled to have you, honoured to have you. I'm looking forward to your interview with Chris in the second half of the show. As I always say to our guests, if there's anything you'd like to comment on in the meantime, feel free to do so. I'm Charlie Ballard, Keating Chambers. I'm actually drinking a glass of red wine that I was given a bottle by Brian May's charity, actually, no less. But it's party time here at Keating because we're celebrating the appointment to Silk of one of my colleagues, Tom Owen, at the age of 34 after 11 years of court, which is pretty impressive. So we're having a little party upstairs. By the way, it's trekking, not skiing. Oh, it's not a ski. There we are. So let me introduce the panel. As I've already taken the mick out of you, Paul, I'll start with you for a change. Assuming it is you, not somebody else behind the glasses. How are you doing and where are you today? It is. It's the great man.
Well, I came on as Mary Cook, so I thought the technique was always to have Mary first. So I'm afraid I'm going to defer to Mary. So you can ask the question in the correct order, Mr. Banner, and I'll tell you what I'm doing in a minute.
Well, I've been told, Mary. Good evening.
Good evening, Charlie. Good evening, Lindsey. It's lovely to have you on the show. Good evening from the town legal office. I'm sitting in the library in one of our internal meeting rooms, and here are my trekking boots, and I'm drinking tea, and it's delightful as ever to see everyone.
Sasha.
Hello, Charlie. Good evening. And I'm so chuffed. Chris is in one of the smaller hotel rooms. I'm in London, and I am drinking. I'm actually not drinking much, to be honest. I've got a nice bottle of Evian in recyclable plastic.
You're trying to work out whether you're at home, Paul, or in some strange ski resort.
No, this is not a skiing gear. This is my trekking stick that I used to walk Hadrian's Wall in 4 days. My 19-year-old son for Child Poverty Action 18 months or so ago, which nearly killed me. So that's what that is. The glasses are because it's always sunny in Northumberland. The scarf is because it's always cold. And the hat is because I'm going to the Calcutta Cup tomorrow, where I was meant to meet Sasha, but he's standing me up, so I'm going with the family instead. So I'm devastated. But good theme, but I'm blooming hot with this on.
He does
joy to see you, Lindsey.
He has love a costume, doesn't he?
At least one of us has to try.
It's not even medieval this time. Chris, you're living the life, I can see.
Yeah, I am in a hotel. I'm in an annex, as Sasha's rightly observed. They haven't put me in the main hotel. I just put all the guests off with my boxes of documents. It's a romantic setting, and I don't fit in with that. I'm in a hotel on the Surrey and Alexander's hotel, free advertising, drinking their sparkling water on the Surrey-Sussex border. I've had a day of site visits with Nick Patterson-Neil, and I've got another site visit tomorrow in Mole Valley. A lot of excitement there. And with the trekking theme, hopefully Rob has got a couple of photographs, because that is the Annapurno base camp at 12,000 feet up in. Yeah, and that was me in my early 20s, about to trek up even higher. And I don't know, there's another photograph. There you go. That is in the Annapurno, where your map comes from. And very enjoyable days. Not that I don't enjoy cross-examining on traffic modelling now, but that was the youth before. But hang on a minute. Before we do anything else, I think we do need to just make a note of this and mention the fact that before we turn to the news, Charlie has been appointed by the King to the House of Lords as a peer, and will be known after his ennoblement on the 18th of March as Lord Banner KC. And what that means, for those who don't know, as far as the planning world is concerned, we'll have a practising planning barrister sitting in the upper legislative chamber, scrutinising legislation, including planning legislation, which is incredible news for our sector, just as when we had Lord Carnwath in the Supreme Court. So I speak on behalf of all of us, Charlie, to say congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Chris. That's extremely kind of you. It's a big responsibility, as I said, but I'll do my best to do it justice. And don't you dare anyone call me Lord Banner. I always thought Charles was terribly formal, which is why I'm Charlie. So let's stick with that.
You're always Baron Banner from now on.
No way. No way.
Baron Banner is.
No. And by the way, my contribution in trekking. So can I encourage anybody who's interested, sign up to the Royal Geographical Society, of which I'm a fellow. I do not get any commission from this. They sponsor one of my favourite treks in history that I like to read about, Captain Scott's trek to the South Pole. It probably worked better for the readers of his histories than it did for him, because he didn't make it back. But a fascinating tale of perseverance and exploration. The Royal Geographical Society were behind that, and that is their latest magazine. A fascinating place with great Monday evening lectures. Now, the news, before we hear the cases. It's been a quiet week or two in the field of planning, and the three things I'd like to highlight and draw attention to, I probably can't do them justice in the slot, but firstly, the London Plan review that was published last week, led by Chris Katkowski, KC, with others, including one of our former guests, Dr. Wei Yang, one of Lindsey's predecessors, to consider any changes to London Plan which might facilitate housing delivery on brownfield sites. And the report, which was provided to the Secretary of State in January, published last week, recommended the introduction in London Plan of a planning presumption in favour of brownfield development, what I understand is now referred to in civil service circles as the Kit Kat presumption. And then the second news story is the potential wider rollout of the so-called Kit Kat presumption, because on the same day as the London report was published, the government published a consultation setting out a number of proposed measures to boost housing delivery on brownfield sites across the country. Amongst other things, the proposals would be that the 20 largest urban areas in England have a presumption in favour of brownfield development if they fail to meet 95% of the housing delivery test targets, and that all councils in the country should be told to give significant weight to benefits of delivering as many homes as possible, especially on brownfield land. So watch this space for the potential further changes to national policy later this year, subject to that consultation. And thirdly, busy fortnight for Kit Kat, because the Manchester authorities report that he was promoting, and Chris, I know you've been heavily involved in this too, Places for Everybody. The inspector's report has been published into Places for Everyone. That's a long-term plan of 9 Greater Manchester districts, basically all of them apart from one. Stockport withdrew from what was formerly called the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework in December 2020, and this report sets out strategic long-term planning for the plan area for the 9 boroughs until 2039, with a number of policies, including allocations, new greenbelt boundary, promoting brownfield development, allocating sites for employment and housing outside the existing urban area, and so on and so forth. Huge amount of work has gone into this, both from the authorities, from those working on it, from the 3 inspectors charged with the gargantuan task of the examination report. And their report has been published last week on Valentine's Day, a lovely Valentine's present for those involved. And they've said that, subject to modifications, legal compliance and soundness tests have been met. And it's now for the various councils to each adopt the plan, which is understood to be likely sometime for the end of March. So well done to all of those involved. And with that, I will pass over to Sasha, and having very kindly bigged me up, you're now going to bring me back down to earth by telling everybody about a case I lost.
No, I'm not, because I can understand completely why the case was brought. I mean, I'm going to talk about, and I better be a bit careful as we're in very esteemed company with both the Lord and the President of the RTPI, so I'm going to be particularly polite and on best behaviour. The NBPF related to the sequential approach and flooding is one of the balmiest pieces of policy in the world. So that's my restrained version and judgment. No, but I mean, we all know paragraph 162 is impossible in reality to understand what it's actually, the ambit and scope of it. And Charlie, I completely understand what led the challenge, because both 162 and para 28 of the PPG and how it's taken forward in development plans is such a minefield of confusion and chaos. And you had the perfect storm in that appeal that you went to the High Court on. So understandably, like all of us who are involved in litigation dealing with this matter, you felt there should be some clarity and some sense about how they all operate in practice. And what did you get? Well, we got the exposition, of course, that policy is for the courts to determine, which is, of course, what the House of Lords confirmed in Tesco and Dundee. But the reality of this case, frankly, for those who watch our programme, it doesn't give any more, in my judgment, any more clarity on the practical application of 162. And I'll bet my bottom dollar that all 5 of us are involved currently in cases where our clients come to us and say, what do we need to do to satisfy the sequential approach? And we all start speaking Swahili, frankly, because we haven't got a clue what to advise them. But no, I'm being slightly irreverent, but I do think there's a very serious point here that, frankly, the current position is so unclear and unhelpful. And I speak personally about it because I'm about to do a case where this is the major issue in dispute. And what my clients have been asked to do by a local authority is remarkable, frankly, in terms of the nature of the development proposed. But there we are. I won't say any more because it's obviously got to be litigated on. But I mean, the simple point for our readers is any of you who are currently applying or considering or dealing with this sequential approach and flooding, you need to read the judgment and effectively come to view. I think it's fair to say that Mr. Justice Holgate did try and draw some tram lines about the parameters of 162. Whether it was successful or not, I'm not too sure. But effectively, I think where I'd say, and Charlie, you'll have a view on this, but I think we're pretty much in the position that there does seem to be a bit like the sequential approach in retail, which I certainly know Chris, Mary and I and Paul spent our early years at the bar wrestling with. I think there are a bit of parameters that fundamentally mean it is relevant to a degree to look at the particulars of what is being proposed. But I would like much more clarity, frankly, as to the ambit and nature of the sequential approach. But I mean, just to sum up, in para 115, the court held that the interpretation of para 162, read together with para 28 of the PPG, is an objective question of law for the court, not for the judgment of a decision maker, which, of course, sounds incredibly impressive and is probably right in law, but completely hopeless for practical application in most of the cases we deal with. So sorry to be such a voice of doom.
Thanks, Sasha. Well, I won't comment on the particular case because the appeal window is still there, and I spent much of today advising somebody else affected by it, as you intimated. But one implication is the judgment does rather suggest that the PPG can do anything It can modify national policy, etc., and doesn't need to be consultation. So, on one level, what that may do is if government did in future want to pull some levers quickly, it maybe act as a silver lining in this judgment, which it can dial up policy quickly and perhaps without consultation in some circumstances. But we will see what comes of that case. Now, we're going to go from the High Court to Epping, where, Mary, you're going to tell us about an appeal decision.
I'm going to take you to Alderton Hill in Loughton. And this is a sorry tale because it was the second failed attempt to secure planning permission for the demolition of 3 properties and the erection of apartments for the elderly with integrated facilities by Elysian. Elysian are the providers of very high-end quality facilities. And we have here the appeal decision. You can see who the inspector was. And we also have, I think, Rob, I'm just going to invite you to bring up the visuals that we have. So on the top one, you see a block which is called Poets Place, which is itself a retirement home. And beyond that, you'll see some 2-story properties. That's the appeal site. And then in the photograph below, again, you'll see the scheme imposed. So that's the one viewpoint. And note in particular the difference between the 2-story element. There's a little wing on the retirement property and the 2-story properties beyond. That's important. I'll come back to it. That's one. Rob, we have another view. Yes, so that's another one from right opposite where you see the existing and the proposed. So that, just to give you some sense of what this was all about. So on the one hand, on one side of the site was this 3-story Poets Place with that 2-story wing closest to the appeal site. And on the other, we had 2-story residential buildings. And just out of sight, but on the right-hand side of these photographs, as you look at the screen, is in fact Roding High School, which had very quite significant buildings, as you might expect, with a big secondary school. And whilst the inspector acknowledged that it wouldn't be out of place in this location to increase the quantum, massing and scale of development, the inspector considered that the proposal would be out of step with the adjacent wing of Poets Place, which he said offered a transition. And instead there would be this 4-story building, which would be awkward and have a discordant relationship with Poets Place adjacent. To the rear, which you don't see, of course, in those photographs, the proposal was 5 stories, and he thought that would be a highly unfamiliar and uncomfortable feature. And although to the rear were allotments, he felt that the views on the allotments would be affected, and as would the views from, again, Poets Place. And because Poets Place wasn't just an ordinary C3, it was a retirement living, he attached quite a lot of weight to the impact of the proposal on the Poets Place residents. He also found there would be harm to living conditions. One of the flats had bedrooms only lit by roof lights. 20% of the living rooms failed the ADF, daylight and sunlight test. And he spent quite a lot of time talking about the earlier decision letter, because the previous decision letter focused very much on the impact from Alderton Hill, didn't really go into any explicit criticism of the 5-story element to the rear. And he therefore spent several paragraphs explaining why he thought the relationship to the rear was important. He thought the relationship on each of the 2 sides with neighbours was discordant. And he explained that whilst the absence of public views was a factor, nevertheless, he felt that the day-to-day experience of residents was important. In other words, private views count. So, all in all, whilst he accepted that there would be significant benefits from the proposal, including freeing up housing, he felt that the identified harm on multiple fronts, as he described it, pointed to overdevelopment and a mismarriage of development versus site capabilities. And so he dismissed for a second time. So, ouch. He dismissed the appeal.
Thanks, Mary. Third time lucky, perhaps. In the meantime, Paul, you're going to tell us about a decision from Somerset.
I am. Before I do so, I have two things to say. The first of which is Jambo to Chris Hannington, who pointed out that Kiswahili is his first language, and therefore Asante for joining us, Chris. Now, that's not Googling. That's from the time I spent in Kenya a few years ago, and it's magnificent. The second of which is, Charlie, I am devastated that you are going to be Baron Banner outside of public inquiries, because in public inquiries, when you continue in practice, which is also something pleasing to me, I can't call you Baron Banner across the inquiry. That's something that's really quite devastating to me. But expect me to do so over every beer I have with you for the foreseeable future. So, the Scottish mantra, just on the Calcutta Cup theme, is it, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That goes to the contrary with the Yorkshire mantra, which is, of course, run away. The cautionary tale I'm about to tell you about is a tale of not giving up, or potentially getting the scheme right in the first place. So there's a town called Creech St Michael's, close to Taunton, in the former Taunton Deane district, in which Inspector Rose, on Valentine's Day as well, granted permission by allowing an appeal to Gladman for 100 homes at North End, in relation to a site where, on the 4th of March 2019, Inspector Decane had dismissed an appeal for Gladman for 200 dwellings. So it's half the size of the dismissed appeal from 5 years before. I'll come back to that in just a moment. If you can just bring up the site layout, Rob, that's great. Yeah, so that shows the 100 units that were being proposed in outline. You can see the settlements to the right. Rob, if you can bring up the former scheme, you can see essentially it was a doubling of the size in area terms and also closer to the motorway and going further to the north, so less opportunity for landscaping. So the decision in front of Mr. Inspector Decane had been taken at a time when the council could demonstrate a 5-year land supply, but the inspector considered, or that inspector in 2019, thought that the scheme was unacceptable in terms of character and appearance and also would affect the settlement in terms of its position within the strategic hierarchy. Well, he came before Mr. Inspector Rose for the smaller scheme. Remember, that's just the right-hand side of what you can see on the screen now. It was an entirely King's affair. Martin Carter promoting it on behalf of Gladman, Killian Garvey on behalf of the local authority in our home territory of Somerset. And there were 5 reasons for refusal initially, 3 of which fell away by the time of the appeal. But on this occasion, the inspector concluded that the council could only demonstrate 3.75 years supply. Now, that's interesting because the position from the council had started off at 5.2 years supply, and the appellants had started off at 2.5 years supply by the time of exchange of evidence. The council's position based upon its Sheila, the acronym for which has got something to do with housing. By the time of the council's rebuttal, 2 weeks after it had provided proofs, the council's housing land supply was up to 6.2 years supply, and after the round table it had dropped to 6.1 years supply, and the appellants had increased to 2.6 years supply. So lots of movement on the round table there. A real advertisement for mediation sitting around the examination table. It was literally an exhausting run through the sites. And to prove that I've read them, halfway through the site, one of the developer respondents described sales as terrible, which is the first time I've seen that in an inspector's report, although I'm sure many that I've been in front of would have wanted to write that about my submissions. The one interesting thing in relation to the 5-year supply is paragraph 53, where the inspector said what an authority can't do is take its strategic housing land assessment and then just add on schemes that have been granted consent subsequently. You can't just make an ad hoc adjustment without taking account of losses. Now, that's a lesson that I thought authorities had learnt about 12 years ago after MPPF first came out, but it's still a lesson that's worth stating. And certainly it was a lesson that the inspector wasn't impressed by. However, he went on to consider each and every one of the additional sites that were being promoted by the council and concluded no 5-year land supply. He also went on to assess character and appearance. This is one where the authority accepted that the site wasn't valued landscaping, but was just on the cusp, within grasping distance of valued landscaping. Well, the inspector roundly rejected that. There was also a suggestion that the previous scheme had a much worse effect, but this inspector said, no, well, the previous scheme was worse, but this was acceptable. There was a green wedge argument where the inspector said, yes, there's a green wedge in the neighbourhood plan, but you've got to look at the real function of a green wedge, and this wouldn't erode the green wedge to any unacceptable degree. And also accepted that this wouldn't unacceptably affect the spatial strategy. So the takeaway from this really was for appellants to be that little bit hypercritical when you're looking at a scheme. I mean, it's part of our job to act as critical friends when you look at a scheme to say, do you know what, you might want to think about pulling this back. And it's always a good idea to, if you are going to engage barristers in your appeals, to instruct them at a time when you can still make amendments, because PINs are loath to make amendments after an appeal button is pressed. So be less ambitious and you might secure a consent. This one secured 5 years after the first attempt. There is one takeaway that I think is worth also flagging up. I don't know, Rob, if you've got paragraph 124 to hand, which is a sort of don't be daft point. There was an argument raised by the local authority to the effect that, well, Gladman is seeking outline permission and they are a strategic land company. Therefore, you can't really place much reliance upon their delivery when you're also discounting the delivery rates of schemes which have outline consent and are controlled by a developer. Well, the inspector said, no, don't be daft, because ultimately strategic land companies make their money. Their business model is by ensuring that there would be a selling of the land to a house builder who will buy it at full value and therefore would have a clear inducement to progress development. So it's an interesting point, really, if you're promoting, but it's also an interesting point if you're an authority to scrutinise the business model of the appellants, because it might not be a strategic land company. It might just be a landowner looking to increase the value of their land. So an interesting little case. And as I said, it's the Scottish mantra, notwithstanding they're going to get beat on Saturday. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Paul. So I think the LPDF did some sort of document a little while ago, didn't they, on land promoters actually being facilitators of speedy delivery? Because
absolutely,
why would they land bank a site, and why would a house builder, having paid money for the site, land bank it?
It's the antithesis of non-delivery to have a strategic land company involved within a scheme, frankly.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Now, without further ado, over to you, Chris, to reintroduce Lindsey and to commence your interview with her.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And of course, Paul, you'll know that you can have a look at paragraph 81 of the MPPF if you want to prove delivery. But I don't think the fact the council haven't got a 5-year land supply means you should then refuse other schemes that might deliver. I think the idea is you deliver more schemes if there isn't a 5-year land supply, whatever the precise delivery record is.
You see?
Anyway, absolutely. But let's move on to the interview, and I should leave 5-year land supply alone. Lindsey Richards, a career in public service and a very distinguished career. You are an extremely modest person, as we discovered discussing this with you the other day, but what an extraordinary career. You graduated from the University of Sheffield, that great home of planning and urban studies. In the 1980s, you took up various posts in local government before moving to Milton Keynes, involved in the expedited delivery that is being done all the time in Milton Keynes. And during your time there, delivering 11,000 homes, consent for 11,000 homes. I mean, that is serious delivery by the public sector. Also involved in their tariff. We now have SIL, of course, but a precursor to that, spreading the infrastructure costs. 2009, you move across to Homes and Communities Agency in Birmingham, rising there to become the head of planning, enabling and development. In 2018, you became the head of Homes England, also the head of the profession within that huge organisation. You also found time somehow to be a trustee of Design Midlands as well. Last year, you stepped back from your role at Homes England to become the Vice President of the Royal Town Planning Institute. And last month, you became the 110th President of the Royal Town Planning Institute. And that is a fantastic career, Lindsey. A fantastic career. My first question is, where did your career begin?
Well, it began in the East Midlands, and I'm still in the East Midlands now, although I've moved across boundaries, as you say, into Buckinghamshire. So I've not moved far, but having said that, and I've been surrounded by my whole of my career by fantastic teams, and I actually have to say, particularly teams in Northampton, and in particular the one at Milton Keynes Partnership. But as you say, it's solely in the public sector, and I'm not really sure if that was a firm decision I made. Maybe I was a bit lazy, or maybe it's because I decided I working for a government agency, you actually get the feel of working with the private and the public sector and the delivery side of it. And so, I think it wasn't a conscientious decision, but a good decision to start in public sector. Really good foundation for me in my career. And actually really lucky, lots of opportunities arisen. I was working at Northampton, where I was responsible for the major projects. So I was able to work on the project at Upton, first design codes for Upton, part of the urban renaissance with John Prescott, working with the Prince's Foundation. And just simple things like delivering studs in a scheme after some significant floods in Northampton. So I've just been very lucky. I've been at the right place at the right time, and have worked with some great colleagues, actually.
Yeah, but as we all know, there's an awful lot of hard work goes into your luck, into anybody's luck, and I suspect that wasn't entirely accidental. You moved to Milton Keynes. What was the work you were doing there?
Well, Milton Keynes, I moved to Milton Keynes. It was Milton Keynes Partnership. So that was a subcommittee of English partnerships. And at that time, English partnerships decided to move away from using the Commission New Towns planning powers and moved into the town and country planning. So basically, Milton Keynes Partnership used its planning powers for major applications for the expansion and delivery of Milton Keynes. And you mentioned there was the Milton Keynes tariff as well. But it was an interesting time. We had our own planning committee, which had a number of an independent chair. Obviously, we had some members from Milton Keynes Council, and it was a really effective delivery process. We had delivery plans all based around business plan. There was forward funding for infrastructure. And actually, as you say, ultimately, we had an overarching legal agreement, of which individual legal agreements hung off that. And we were in a position to deliver planning permission for 11,000 houses, of which most of those were coded and there were frameworks. But even though we had the planning powers from Milton Keynes Council, we still relied on the council to deliver the advice on highways policy, and it was effective working relationship with the council. So it was a good experience.
Yeah, well, we might have a change of government later in the year, nobody knows, and they might want to get 1.5 million done, which means hitting 300,000 a year. So these are important issues. What are the mechanisms that actually work to deliver 300,000 homes a year? I was interested in that. You need really the infrastructure to be funded up front. Getting developers to fund all the roads and everything else seems to just deprive it of the affordable housing. But if the government puts in the infrastructure, that's how you deliver quickly, isn't it, really?
I think so. And I think also the significance of the tariff was it was paid in instalments. So it wasn't an upfront cost. It helped with cash flow for the developers. Yeah. So there was a confidence, all-round confidence, really, in the delivery.
Okay, then to the Homes and Communities Agency, which sort of grew into Homes England, which has now become a much bigger body. Lots of people ask this question: what exactly does Homes England do? What is its primary function?
It is, it's a non-departmental public body. It's sponsored and funded by DLUC. And I suppose, to be succinct, it's the government's housing and regeneration agency. There are statutory objectives, and there's a remit to deliver quality, affordable housing, well-designed places. And I would say its key focus really is to accelerate the pace of house building and regeneration. And as we've shown, it does have planning powers, huge amount of expertise across a number of, across all the staff, I should say, and the teams there, land holdings, obviously capital, and a lot of influence and the ability to build partnerships. So I would say it's an organisation of highly skilled professionals. So it includes chartered surveyors, accountants, obviously planners, designers. And it's an organisation that will use its and share its expertise through best practice, forming partnerships. And I think the one thing to say, being a government agency, it has to be fleet of foot, which I think it has proven itself. At times it's difficult, but it's responding to a changing context at much of the time. So it's very supportive to staff. It provides a lot of training. I've just seen Jeff Lloyd's comments about Milton Keynes. Excellent. I love that.
He's just said that your necklace is a nod to Milton Keynes' design.
You can see it all laugh at the same time.
I'm very glad you laughed at that. I say about a career in the public sector, but really it's a career in delivery. You've been at the forefront of delivery throughout your career. So what are the key ingredients in delivering homes fast?
Well, I have to start, don't I, with a local plan, of course. Clear policy, a local plan given due weight. And then I would say there are obvious elements building on that. So I'm absolutely early community engagement. That's something that my team at Homes England were working on in terms of a toolkit, which, again, shared externally. I would say a project team approach. So it shouldn't be them and us. It should be a joint team approach, shared objectives, a shared vision for that locality. And you mentioned earlier about potential, ideally, funding for key infrastructure. And if that was forward funding upfront, that would assist. And then I think quality design, creating places, placemaking, and more community engagement. And I say that because I truly believe, we need to be selling the value of what planning brings and what development brings. And I think there's a misunderstanding. And again, it goes back to the misinformation campaign with the RTPI, which is there's a lack of understanding of planners' role and actually the value that we bring.
And I think we all agree with that. What's the best role for the public sector agencies like Homes England to take in housing delivery? What's the best role that they can perform?
I think the RTPI, and when we were coming up to the party conferences last year, the RTPI produced the Planifesto. So this is basically some recommendations and some proposals whereby if we are going to deliver, then actually what are the suggestions, what are the proposals, how can we nationally position ourselves to actually get that delivery. And it was also to promote the profession as well. Let's be true about that. But it highlighted interventions, and one of those really was about encouraging councils to play a master developer role. About land assembly and supply of land. And again, this is a role that Homes England has taken place and taken part. So there's a question there, obviously, around capacity and whether or not there are the skills within local authorities. I'd like to think there are. They need to be employed. But there are also other recommendations in the Planifesto, which is, I'm sure you would agree, local plans should be given greater weight, more certainty, and that would give increased confidence. And then also something around, should we be having infrastructure plans to support the delivery of the local plan, and they should be published and up to date. And I think going back to the point around bringing communities with us, let's see more around social value and around what we can do for existing communities and how they would benefit from a new development, rather than having what we used to say in Milton Keynes, we want to avoid two-speed city. We want everybody to be benefiting from development and building one community.
Okay. And you touched on the RTPI there. Obviously, we are now into your presidential year. We are all big supporters of the RTPI, and we can see the benefit. You see it everywhere. You see it at select committees. The RTPI asks for their views by the select committee. You see it at various campaigns you mentioned at the party conferences. Going back to your career, why did you get involved in the RTPI?
Well, it's a profession I obviously really care about. I've spent according to my Annapurna permit, 90 years in planning. But it's, we are undervalued as a profession, and I don't think we're given the recognition that I think we deserve. And that's not just current. When I was thinking about my inauguration speech, and I started looking at past president speeches, and I mentioned, Vincent van Gogh. He was talking 20 years ago about planning being in a crisis. And then we've got when we had the MPPF introduced, again, planning is in a crisis. We're really in a crisis now, and that's, 20 years have passed. So I think when you feel passionate about something and when you see it declining and not being valued, then I think you have to just get involved. And the RTPI, they're a hardworking, I would say, this membership organisation, a hardworking team. Victoria works endlessly. I don't know where she gets her energy from. And I think us as volunteers actually need to be supporting the Institute. And there's so many roles available for people to get involved in. There's the General Assembly, there's obviously the Board of Trustees, and then there's all the standing committees and the nations and regions, numerous networks, Young Planners Network. There's a huge raft there where people can get involved and actually make a contribution to the Institute.
Yeah, and well done to those companies and those authorities and other organisations which support people who devote time to the RTPI, because, it's so important that everybody has the time to do that. And it's very noticeable which organisations and companies support that. Every president has a theme. What's your theme for the coming year?
Well, I mentioned planning being in a crisis, and I suppose, and what I didn't want to do was have a completely new theme, and so wanted to build on the success that Sue had as a president, and the role and the themes that she took forward. So when we talk about planning being in a crisis and being, there are issues which we need to support and promote, we'll talk, what does that look like and what do we mean by that? And we're talking about, the number of vacancies in local authorities, the loss of senior staff, planning staff from the public sector to the private sector, or even out of the profession. And then I think also, such issues such as, salaries not keeping pace. We know we're not in this for the money. We're in this because it's a public good, but actually it would help slightly. I remember I was talking to a planner in the Northwest he was a chartered planner, but he'd actually moved into the housing department because they were actually paid more than the planners. I mean, that just can't be right.
No.
So I think we've had the career survey, and we've identified that planning is under-resourced. We talk about it being overworked, underpaid, and we say about it being under attack. So my theme is trying to sort of bring all that together and trying to sort of address those issues. And actually, if we can address those issues, then we can encourage people to come into planning as a career, an early career choice. We don't want the headlines and the social media of, planners are the enemy of the state. We want planning to be recognised for what it is and the value it brings. So it's about trying to build planning as a career, the early career choice. And that means different entries into the organisation.
Okay, my last question before I open it up to the others is, yes, you want to get more people into the profession. The Labour Party have said they'll fund 300 more officers, although that is only just one per authority, really. But how do you do it? How do you get more people into a profession when they can see the rates of pay? Planners get slated in the press, and we all know the online abuse of officers is a real problem. How do you get people to come in to the profession in the numbers that we need?
I think there's a number of elements here. The RTPI last year launched its It Takes Planners and campaign. And this is about addressing misinformation. And that can only help to raise the profile of planning and what we do. And it's also, I would say, it's about making that connection with issues that are really important to young people in our society. So, I come across the young people who are absolutely passionate about climate change, but I would question whether or not they make the connection between trying to address climate change and actually what planning can contribute in that field. So it's raising awareness, it's dealing with misinformation. And I think certainly in our campaign, we talk about grabbing the narrative and taking, and dispelling those untruths, as we can say that. And for me, I think we all have a role in this. I talk about, let's all be planning influencers. Let's actually take the time to talk about the jobs we do and the value that we add and the contribution we make. It takes time, and I'm fully aware of, our planning function and resources being under-resourced. But it feels like, we need to grab this and we need to be promoting what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I'm at risk of hogging you. I'm very much enjoying this conversation, but I'm going to throw it open and turn to Mary and ask Mary for your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Lindsey, based on your experience, what advice would you give to your younger self as a young female planner seeking to advance your career in local government is my first question, and then I'm going to ask you another one, if I may.
Yeah, I think this is around. I mean, for me, local government is such a great foundation for the start of a career, and I think for those who are in local government, I think it's about getting as much experience across many different fields, and I'm not just talking about within planning, but actually understanding the corporate goals, the corporate objectives, corporate plans, and actually understanding what the role planning has within that. And I think the other thing is actually trying to get some experience in delivery. So understanding the sort of land values, but also thinking of a project not just as a planning application, but the life of a project, how long it takes before it becomes a planning application and how long it takes beyond that for delivery. It's almost, I was talking at Liverpool University on Monday, we were talking about the advantage of adopting a project and understanding the actual lifespan of a project, because I think in my early days, I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, developers could help in that. You could, why can't we have more developers going in and talking to young planning officers and explaining the whole journey, as it were. I think that would be invaluable. The other thing I wanted to just ask you about was how important do you think it is for young professional women to have access to mentors?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it's really important. And I didn't approach mentoring as in me being a mentee and having a mentor until I was late in my career. And I think that was certainly a missed opportunity. And it's just in the early days, and it's just so important to have that understanding of the workplace expectations, sense checking where you're going, but also, this thing about, so where you're going to be in 2 years, where you're going to be in 3 years, and just stretching people. And for me, I get a huge reward from being a mentor, and still keep in touch with many that I hope I've helped on the way.
I'm sure you have. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. And Paul, what's your question?
Lindsey, one of the most enjoyable things that I've done in my profession, bizarrely, was to spend an afternoon at my eldest son's former school and chatting to their geography A-level class and telling them what I did. And then suddenly realising how much I really enjoyed what I did and the cases I was involved in and the projects I was involved in. On this programme, we've had Rob Rinder being transformed and saying to Charlie, remarkably, oh my goodness, I didn't realise that planning was sexy. How do we convince those who might otherwise be really interested in geography and creation of these things, how do we convince them that planning really is a sexy profession?
Well, we need more of you, don't we, Paul? We need more. We need more people. We need
He's sexy.
Increased presence. Going into our schools and talking to young people. And I think certainly that's something that the RTPI are taking on board. We've got a Balance Initiative, which is currently looking at and putting together a toolkit, which we can use with our school ambassadors, which hopefully will relaunch and we can increase the number. And they will be targeted to go into areas of growth and in schools where the profession is underrepresented. So we can actually, hopefully, get more of a diverse professional cohort coming through. But, there are so many entries into planning. And I think, again, that's what we've got to promote. We've got a really successful apprenticeship programme. We need to build on that. And we need to be thinking about encouraging graduates from other disciplines to be coming into planning. That way, it can only just increase the diversity and the knowledge that they bring. But, as I said earlier, we've all got to be planning influencers and we've got to promote and push our profession.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Thank you, Paul. Sasha, your question?
Thank you, Chris. Yes, Lindsey, what do you think about, do you not think that there's a bit of a division between private practice and public sector planning now? What about making it mandatory for qualification to spend time in local authority to have a full and proper understanding of how planning works with that perspective, and also to force everyone, frankly, to experience the pressures and demands of local authority work currently? What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. And I certainly, something, as I say, I think local government is a great foundation for the start. And there is, if you think the LGA have actually, they're promoting their pathways into planning, which again is geared towards local government. And then the RTPI, we've got the bursary scheme, again, trying to encourage people in. If we could round something up, which is, it's not a postgraduate, but it's actually a requirement that there is a certain amount of time spent in local authority, I'd fully support it.
Thank you, Sasha. That's a really interesting question. I've seen a number of things in this theme, including a young man called Bart Shrim, who worked at a major company in Birmingham in, plush offices in the city, and then took up a position at Sandwell, taking his expertise, which included a lot of knowledge about viability and so on, and taking that into a local authority sort of 3-5 years into his career. So it doesn't even necessarily just have to be at the start, does it? It could be after you've gained some commercial experience, Mary's point, and then go in and provide that as part of a team within local authority. Really, really interesting point. Finally then, and over to you, Charlie, what's your question?
Before I ask my question, but I have to say, I'm not sure that I'm more amused or appalled at the idea of Paul as the face of sexy planning. Do anyone remember Right Said Fred?
Yes.
Years ago, we overdone Paul on a video of Game of Thrones. I have a feeling that maybe another video coming along via on private commissions. Anyway, to be continued. But honestly,
for anybody listening on the podcast, Paul started to unbutton his shirt there.
That's it all. He's too sexy for his plans. Anyway, on a more serious note, Lindsey, when we had your predecessor, Sue, on the show around about this time last year, she told us about the various excellent work the RTPI have been doing to provide training expertise to Ukrainians seeking to rebuild their country following the illegal war there. So the generation, if not more, of work there, and lots of skills we can help provide. I know individual consultancies like Nick Lee's NJL Consulting are doing their own initiatives in conjunction with the RTPI, I think, too. I'm just keen to know from you, how's it going? Are you able to update us on how that work is going and what the current initiatives are in that respect?
Well, that's an interesting question, Charlie. And so the RTPI do offer direct support for displaced planners. So that will include colleagues from Ukraine. And that's really talking about planners coming in and needing to get into employment, needing some support in terms of equipment, travel, etc. So there is a budget for that, and the details of that are on the website. But in terms of more indirect support, and I suppose that's where we're working with other built environment professions. We are a member of the European Council of Spatial Planners. And so there's a number of actions which has come through from that organisation. There has been regular dialogue and there's contact as well. And so, again, there was a face-to-face meeting in November in Gantz. Mm-hmm. And then also there is the Association of Spatial Planners, Urban Council of National Union of Architects, who've been welcomed in. So, and the only other thing I will... which you may be familiar with, Charlie, I'm not sure, which is the Restart Ukraine. Yeah. So this is actually a website and a forum where we're a member, and it's a platform where there's some case studies and there's certain number of stages in terms of helping to rebuild. So there is some support out there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Bravo for that and for all those involved in those schemes. Chris, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I have to say that it is quite remarkable how much the RTPI do, actually. The different range of things you do and huge numbers of volunteers. I mean, what an extraordinary organisation. Actually, take our hats off to all of you.
It is.
So,
it is.
Yeah, and needs to be acknowledged. Right, back to you, Charlie.
Thanks very much. Well, all that is left for me to say is thank you, Lindsey, for coming on. I think the third consecutive president we've had on the show, which is a great honour. So thanks to the RTPI too. And there he is, Paul, on his Eddie the Eagle Eat Your Heart Out. And so thank you. It's been a great privilege, a really fascinating interview, and we will see you all in 2 weeks' time for our next episode. So until then, watch this space. I'm off to go celebrate somebody who's about 10 years younger than me getting silk, which is rather impressive. Take care.
Thanks, Lindsey.
Cheers, Lindsey.
Bye.